Thud thud thud. Attacks battered against Kutaba's body like raindrops. Enough ants could gnaw an elephant to death, and not even someone like Kutaba could endure so many attacks at once. His vigorous aura plunged and rapidly weakened. Get out of my way! With a harsh cry, Kutaba exploded with intense golden light, blowing away Li Sai, Cui Piaoqi, and all the other Wuxiang cavalry. A lion could not endure the jeering of sheep, and a dragon would be enraged by the disdain of shrimp. No matter the time or place, Kutaba would never be able to endure affront from such weaklings. But just when Kutaba had sent Li Sai and the others flying, a mountainous figure instantly appeared in front of him. Before Kutaba could react, a heavy and simple sword slashed down with tremendous strength. The black armored guard had chosen this moment to strike. In the previous battle, the black armored guard had endured the majority of Kutaba's attacks. If not for him, the defense line would have collapsed long ago. But the black armored guard had paid a price for this, consuming an enormous quantity of energy. It was for this reason that Wang Chong had not asked him to participate in the previous battle. But that was then and this was now. Kutaba was far from as fierce and unstoppable as he was before. Plush! Kutaba shuddered at this strike, ejecting a mouthful of blood from his mouth. He was already riddled with wounds, and this heavy strike from the black armored guard instantly worsened his condition. Bastard! All of you will pay a price. Kutaba's furious roar resounded through the heavens, but he was suddenly interrupted. Die! A sharp wood steel sword cut through the air, slashing at Kutaba with incredible speed. Kutaba grimaced and immediately exploded with golden light to stop Wang Chong. But a moment later, enormous quantities of psychic energy suddenly plunged into his mind. This assault was so sudden that Kutaba slowed down for a moment, a flaw appearing in his barrier of golden light. Psychic Pierce. Stellar Energy Piercer. Wang Chong used two attacks in the same moment. The first was to slow down Kutaba's own attack and create a weakness, while the second was to pierce through Kutaba's stellar energy. Swish! In a cold flash of light, Kutaba's head was sent flying from his shoulders. No! Milord! Kutaba! Time seemed to stop. Abu Muslim, Ziad, Daluan Ruozan, and the countless Arab cavalry who were charging forward became deathly pale. They came to a halt, and a chill ran through their bodies. The war god of Arabia, the undefeated Kutaba who had campaigned across the world, had actually been defeated. In this first war to conquer the East, he had fallen. This was nothing but a hellish nightmare to all Arabs. Impossible! How could this be? Daluan Ruozan's hair was in disarray, his heart in panic. With the fall of Kutaba, Daluan Ruozan's dreams were shattered. Ever since the War of the Southwest, Yusang had been on a steady decline. Daluan Ruozan had long ago placed all his hopes on this Battle of Talas. But now, everything was settled. Not even Daluan Ruozan could do anything to salvage the situation. The Arabs and Tibetans were eerily quiet, but the Tang, after a momentary silence, exploded with heaven-shaking cheers. Wang Chong! Wang Chong! Wang Chong! The cheers shook the world, all the Tang acting as if they had gone insane. No one had expected that this battle would turn out like this. Wang Chong had successfully led them in turning the tables, not only defeating the Arabs and Tibetans, but also killing Kutaba, the greatest threat to the Great Tang. Kill! With this single order, the entire army charged forward. The Great Tang had won. After several months of fierce fighting, the Great Tang had finally emerged as the victor of this gruesome war, had been the one to have the last laugh. Now was the time to reap the fruit of victory. Kill! The first to react were the remaining several thousand Wuxiang cavalry. Amidst thundering hooves, they plunged like a sharp sword into the enemy army. Aya! Screams resounded in the chaos as countless Arabs and Tibetans were cut down. Bang! At almost the same moment, a massive pole forged from deep-sea Xian metal and some other unknown metal stabbed into the earth, the black and red banner upon it flapping in the wind. Clang, clang, clang. Streams of energy once more began to spread outward, strengthening the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Dragon Stallion Army, and other Tang elite armies, the dazzling halos once more emerging. The large losses meant that they were far less dazzling, but they were still just as sharp. Without the slightest hesitation, the entire army advanced at full speed into the Arab and Tibetan cavalry. In a flash, the armies clashed, and Arabs and Tibetans were cut down from their horses, their blood forming pools. Retreat! Hurry and retreat! Panic shouts rang out over the battlefield. Their rout was as swift as a landslide. Neither the Arabs nor the Tibetans were in any mood for battle, and they were now being pushed back again and again. No blow could have been more destructive than the death of Qutayba, and the army's morale had been utterly shattered. All of them just wanted to get as far away from the nightmarish Talas as soon as possible, even ignoring any sort of formation or rank as they ran up against each other in their haste to flee. The entire battlefield was in complete mayhem. Ah! Screams tore through the air as the Arabs and Tibetans, impeded by the soldiers in front of them, found it hard to run and were soon run down by the elite Tang soldiers coming up behind them. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. In this wholesale retreat and the chaos it created, the losses suffered by the Arabs and Tibetans quickly began to pile up, and the ground was instantly strewn with corpses. When one side's army completely lost the will to fight, a battle could no longer be considered a battle. Rather, it would become a one-sided massacre. And when a person was filled with panic and no longer had a fearless will, they wouldn't even be able to use 50% of their actual strength. This was a land of despair and lamentation. Thousands of Tibetans and Arabs were falling, and amidst this slaughter, this was the thought that emerged in their minds. Fire! In the rear of the army, Su Hanshan waved his hand and gave the order, and a volley of ballista bolts instantly flew through the air to plunge into the panicked Arabs and Tibetans. Plush, plush, plush. 2 Tibetans and 1 Arab were shot through by a single ballista bolt and immediately dropped dead to the ground. This occurrence repeated itself across the battlefield. During the battle, Zhang Shouji and the craftsman had finally managed to produce a batch of ballista bolts. Su Hanshan was even more straightforward and gathered ballista bolts from the battlefield. As long as they were not so deformed that they could no longer even be loaded onto the ballistae, he would use them. With the Arabs and Tibetans having completely lost the will to fight, now was the perfect time to increase the enemy losses. Increasing the number of enemy dead was far more important than conserving the ballista bolts. Pass on my order. All the Mamelukes must head to the front line to stop them. Without anyone to cover the retreat, none of us will be able to get back alive. Abu Muslim was also in a panic. In these current circumstances, even his orders were finding it very difficult to restrain the army. Qutayba's death had simply had too great an impact on all the soldiers. He could only place his hopes on the veteran and disciplined Mamelukes. But mere moments after Abu Muslim had issued his order, he heard a scream ringing in his ears. Ah! Abu Muslim turned with a jolt and saw a sight that made his body turn ice-cold. In the midst of the chaotic army, the Tibetan great general Huashu Huaitsong had suddenly been stabbed through his chest by a sword and held up high in the air so that his blood could drip to the ground. And the wielder of that sword, Abu Muslim could tell, was that young and ever so familiar figure. Huashu Huaitsong. You brought this on yourself. Wang Chong stared at Huashu Huaitsong, his eyes brimming with killing intent. Huashu Huaitsong and Daluan Ruozhen, this general and minister pair, had nearly succeeded in forcing Wang Chong to watch his own father Wang Yan die in battle. If he hadn't reacted quickly enough, he would probably have ended up cursing himself for the rest of his life. For this reason, even though he could permit anyone else to leave, Huashu Huaitsong had to die. Clap! A blood-stained arm suddenly seized Wang Chong's arm. Huashu Huaitsong's muscular body was held aloft by Wang Chong's sword. His face was pale, and his aura was flickering like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished at any moment. And yet there was a sliver of a smile on his face, as if he no longer cared about whether he lived or died. The victor is king while the loser is a villain. That's all it is. I have nothing to say about that. Wang Chong, you truly are Yusang's greatest foe. But as a general, to die at your hands on this battlefield is an appropriate end. As a general, I hope that you can agree to a request of mine. Great Minister is just a civil official. Without my assistance, he will find it very difficult to threaten you in the future. You have won this battle, so I ask that you spare great minister's life." Blood flowed down Huashu Huaizong's arm and through every chink of his armor, but the smile on his face seemed to only get wider. His eyes were calm, as if he had long ago prepared himself for the end. But one of his arms was clenched around Wang Chong's sword, and there was a hint of pleading in his eyes. Wang Chong was stunned. He had never imagined that this was what Huashu Huaizong would be thinking in the final moments of his life. "Huashu!" A heart-wrenching cry came from the distance. When Daluan Ruozhen saw that Wang Chong had run Huashu Huaizong through with his sword and was holding him aloft in the air, he felt like his own heart had been pierced through by 10,000 arrows. At that moment, his mind was completely blank and his soul seemed to have been snatched away. His eyes lost all their light. In the War of the Southwest, the cavalry of the Ngari royal lineage, which they had needed decades to accumulate, had been almost completely wiped out on the shores of the Arai, and the region of the plateau occupied by the Ngari royal lineage itself had been rendered a complete no-man's land. And yet the light in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had never gone out. When he had been imprisoned in the Tsenpo's prison to live a dark and sunless life, the light in his eyes had never gone out. Even after they had experienced setback after setback in Talas, the light in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had never dimmed. Not even the death of Dusong Mangpoj, the eagle of the plateau, could cause Daluan Ruozhen's eyes to darken. But when Wang Chong ran Huashu Huaizong through with his sword and held him high in the air, the light in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes was snuffed out, and they became utterly devoid of life. "Great Minister, go!" An urgent voice bellowed out from the roaring wind. Huaba Senji, leading the remnants of the Mutri Great Cavalry, anxiously stared at Daluan Ruozhen's back. The Arabs had already lost and Qutayba had been killed. The Tibetans had no more reason to stay in this place. The Tang could charge over at any time, so the urgent task at hand was to preserve what manpower they had left, escape Talas, and return to Yusang. But at this moment, Daluan Ruozhen was in a completely downcast state, staring in Huashu Huaizong's direction while completely unaware of the rest of the world. Huaba Senji's mind was aflame with concern, and he immediately shouted orders at two of his Mutri Great Cavalry. "Get over there and help Great Minister onto his warhorse, and then immediately withdraw." "Yes." The two Mutri Great Cavalry swiftly dismounted, frantically grabbed Daluan Ruozhen, and placed him on a horse. "Run!" A moment later, Huaba Senji took Daluan Ruozhen, the remaining Mutri Great Cavalry, and the remaining Tibetan soldiers fleeing in a churning cloud of dust, not even paying a glance toward the Arabs behind them. In the face of a calamity, everyone had to fend for themselves. The soldiers of the Great Tang would catch up soon, so everyone could only take their lives into their own hands. Huaba Senji's force moved very quickly, traveling tens of thousands of feet in just a few short moments. And when he heard the ruckus behind him and saw the Tibetans fleeing in a trail of dust, Abu Muslim could only sigh, a complicated look on his face. He knew that the battle was over. "Pass on my order. There's no need to try and stop them. All soldiers, withdraw at full speed." By working with the Tibetans, the Arabs might have been able to hold back the Tang for a while to preserve as much manpower as possible when they returned to Samarkand. But the Western Turks had already fled, and now the Tibetans were fleeing as well. The Arabs were left alone on the battlefield, and a single block of wood could not hold up a crumbling gate. The only choice here was to run. Gallop! The tens of thousands of Arabs cast off their armor and screamed as they began to madly flee westward. Unlike the previous few times, there was no resistance, nor was this any sort of strategic retreat. There wasn't even any need to sound a retreat signal. Everyone fled in a mad rush to protect their own lives. "Kill!" A shout resounded over the sky and war drums thundered. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Wang Yan, Cui Piaoqi, and Li Sai all charged forward. At the same time, the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Roaring Tiger Army, the other elite armies, and even Su Hanshan's ballista soldiers swept past the steel defense line in pursuit of the defeated Arab army. On the battlefield, Wang Chong slowly withdrew his sword, gently placing Huashu Huaizong's corpse onto the ground. "Someone, Take care of Huashu Huizong's body. Give him an individual burial, Wang Chong said from atop his horse. In the end, Huashu Huizong had not been able to wait until Wang Chong gave him an answer, but when he saw Huaba Sengji grab Daluan Ruozhen and flee the battlefield, this renowned general of Yusang, a great general of Yusang who had once contended against Zhangzhou Jianxiong, finally closed his eyes. As his enemy, Wang Chong had originally been brimming with killing intent, but once Huashu Huizong finally died, his killing intent receded, leaving behind pure respect for a true great general. Though they were mortal foes, Huashu Huizong could be considered a true soldier. Even in his final moments, he was not thinking of himself, but of the fleeing Daluan Ruozhen. That smile had left an extremely deep impression on Wang Chong. Perhaps this is the best ending for you. With this thought, Wang Chong quickly regained his composure and looked into the distance. As he stared at the Arabs and Tibetans retreating in a great cloud of dust, his eyes turned harsh and sharp. Even if Abu Muslim fled to the ends of the earth, Wang Chong would hunt him down. He would not give him a chance to catch his breath, much less come back again. Hiya! The white-hoofed shadow neighed and immediately brought Wang Chong into a flying leap, covering more than 100 feet in a single bound as it went off in pursuit. As Wang Chong moved out, all of the power the Great Tang had at Talas was mobilized. Even those shepherds of the western regions that had fled a great distance were excitedly shouting as they charged back. After gathering up their herds, they began to follow the army. Divine soldiers! They must be divine soldiers! A shepherd, his head covered in a white headscarf, was so excited that his entire body was shaking. The Great Tang had truly given him an enormous surprise. Whether it was about using the myriad Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation to attack Kataba or that final heaven-shaking battle, the Great Tang had not leaked out any information, not even to their allies. But no one was complaining about it now. It was enough that Arabia could be defeated and the battle won. War should be left to those people responsible for war. Hear my order. Teams 2 and 3, dismantle the steel walls. Team 1, load the steel onto the transport carriages and prepare to follow the army. Zhang Shouji's beard was flying in the wind and his elderly eyes were shining brightly. After working with Wang Chong so many times, Zhang Shouji had long ago ceased to be a simple craftsman and now knew some things about military affairs. After a stalemate of several months, Zhang Shouji sensed that this pursuit would not come to an end so easily. This would be an unprecedented hunt, and these steel walls could be tremendously useful to Wang Chong in any future battles. And now that the city of Talas behind him had collapsed, there was no defensive value in holding this ground. This was a barren land that wasn't even good for grazing. Someone of Wang Chong's personality was bound to advance the defense line. Zhang Shouji understood this through the mutual understanding he had developed with Wang Chong over their long relationship. Kill! With the Wuxiang cavalry and Tongluo cavalry leading the way while the shepherds and craftsmen brought up the rear, this unprecedented pursuit began. The pursuit went on through day and night, and even the elite infantry armies decided to mount horses so that they could keep up. This was a great taboo in ordinary circumstances and did not allow these elite soldiers to wield their full power, but at a time like this, military tactics were completely irrelevant. The Arab cavalry had lost all their will to fight. For the first time in their history, these fearless Arabs that lived for war had encountered a stronger and more courageous opponent. For the first time, they had experienced a complete rout. Great Minister, hurry! Ahead of us is the stone bridge. As long as we get across, we can destroy the stone bridge and then return to the Tibetan plateau through greater and lesser valor, throwing off the Tang pursuit. Huaba Sengji frantically called out. The Tang pursuit was far fiercer than imagined. They had been fleeing from Talas all this time, and yet the roars of the Tang behind them had been ever present. It was as if the Tang were determined to chase down the Tibetans and Arabs until they were completely wiped out. Huaba Sengji had a proud personality, and he had led his Mutri great cavalry to this battle to correct their reputation. But now, Huaba Sengji didn't even dare to look back. The auras of Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, the Black Armored Guard, Chang Qianli, and the others were like threatening storms, and no one amongst the Tibetans could stand against them. Even someone as proud as Dama Trimo, had put away his Buddhist dagger and was fleeing with all his might. As for Abu Muslim and Ziyad, because they had given their energy to Qutayba, they were extremely weak. Moreover, they had not been given any time to rest or recover their energy. In this state, the Tibetans and Arabs did not have the right to battle with the Tang. Hua Senji turned to the nearby Dayan Ersongrong. Dayan Ersongrong, lead a group of soldiers to disrupt the Arabs and slightly slow them. The Tang are mostly focused on the Arabs right now. If they're thrown into disorder for a few moments, we'll have a greater chance at survival. Even though Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Huaitsong had both been killed, the Tibetans still had some soldiers that could fight. Understood. Dayan Ersongrong immediately led a group of soldiers charging toward the Arabs. With just a single charge and a chorus of shouts and curses, the Arabs were impeded by Dayan Ersongrong. As expected, the soldiers in the rear were significantly slowed and fell into disorder. In the past, Hua Senji would have never dared to do such a thing, but now that they had lost, the two sides could no longer be considered allies. As long as he and the great minister could return to Yusang, nothing else mattered. Go! Everyone go! Get across the stone bridge, and then we can destroy it and cut off the pursuit. Hua Senji sternly shouted. Gallop! A highland steed bounded forward onto the stone bridge that all of them had arrived at. Behind it, hundreds of thousands of Tibetan soldiers followed like a school of fish swimming through a stream. Hua Senji turned his head and yelled behind him, Great Minister, hurry and go! I will cover your retreat. The great Tang warhorses were creating a thunderous roar, the entire world quaking as they approached with astonishing speed. The dying wails of the Arabs pierced through the skies, causing the Tibetans to quail in fear. If they did not flee now, they would be next. What are you standing around for? Hurry and escort the great minister out of here. Hua Senji pointed at two Mutri great cavalry. Hua. Suddenly, a calm and wise voice interrupted Hua Senji's order. The sound of his name in his ears startled Hua Senji, and he instantly had an ill foreboding. For some reason, he sensed the aura of death in Daluan Ruozen's voice. Great Minister, we'll have time to talk when we get back. You two bastards. Didn't you hear what I said? Hua Senji's eyes went wide, and before Daluan Ruozen could say anything more, he began to reprimand his two subordinates. Hua Senji, let us part ways here. Daluan Ruozen sat on the back of his horse and raised his head. Amidst the roars of fighting and killing, his voice was abnormally calm, so calm that it made Hua Senji uneasy. Great Minister, what nonsense are you saying? Hurry and go! Hua Senji's eyes wildly twitched as if understanding what was about to happen. Haha, Hua, there's no need to say anything more. More than 100,000 soldiers were killed and the Mutri Great Cavalry has sustained severe losses. Someone has to take responsibility for all this, and moreover, Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Huaitsong have both died on this battlefield. Even if we return to Yusang, do you think that the Tsenpo will let us go? Daluan Ruozen faintly smiled, his expression growing even calmer. Great Minister! Hua Senji was frozen in shock. His mind was bursting with things to say, but in the face of Daluan Ruozen's simple argument, he couldn't manage to squeeze out a single one. Hua, go! Only if I remain can you survive. My era is already over. In the future, Yusang can only depend on you. Tell the Tsenpo that I did all I could. Daluan Ruozen's eyes seemed to see through everything. After one last glance at Hua Senji, he pulled on the reins of his horse and began to ride back to the rear. Wang Chong, do you dare to come out for a meeting? Daluan Ruozen's loud voice resounded over the battlefield, and he gave his horse a fierce slap, spurring it into a charge. Great Minister. Behind him, Hua Senji stared speechlessly at that confident and relaxed figure. Meanwhile, the sound of Daluan Ruozen's voice caused a minor disturbance in the pursuing Tang army. It's Daluan Ruozen. This bastard must be up to something. Qianli, take some men to stop him. In the middle of the vast battlefield, Gao Xianji, mounted on a white warhorse, instantly spotted Daluan Ruozen riding over. Gao Xianji was deeply apprehensive toward Daluan Ruozen. Although Daluan Ruozan was a purely civil minister, this battle would have never been so complicated without him, nor would there have been a three-way alliance between the Arabs, Tibetans, and Western Turks. Particularly in that final battle, Gao Xianji was practically certain that Daluan Ruozan had been greatly involved in the plan that had dispelled the god avatars of Wang Yan and Cheng Qianli, causing the Great Tang to almost lose the battle. There was even a chance that he had been the architect behind the entire plan. Although he really couldn't think of what sort of tricks Daluan Ruozan could play in this situation, Gao Xianji still felt instinctively wary toward him. "Wait a moment. Let me do it." A voice came from the distance, and Wang Chong rode up atop his white-hoofed shadow. "Xue Qianjun, pass on my order. Have Cui Piaoqi continue leading the army in pursuit. As for Daluan Ruozan, leave him to me. Without my order, no one is to touch him." Daluan Ruozan's actions were too abnormal, but unlike Gao Xianji, Wang Chong didn't believe that he was up to any schemes. Dusong Mangpoj was dead, Huashu Huizong was dead, and he had even personally killed Qutayba. No matter how shrewd of a schemer Daluan Ruozan was, even he was powerless to change this situation. Whoosh! Following Wang Chong's order, ripples began travel through the Tang army. All the soldiers were like the waters of a river encountering rock, parting and rushing past Daluan Ruozan as they approached him. Wang Chong's order was perfectly carried out, with all the soldiers acting as if they hadn't seen Daluan Ruozan as they charged past him to continue the pursuit. A group of soldiers naturally split off from the rest of the army to remain with Wang Chong. All this done in the blink of an eye. After consecutive wars and consecutive victories, Wang Chong's prestige in the army was like a towering tree. Even the Tongluo cavalry that Wang Chong had bad blood with had chosen to obey Wang Chong's orders at this time. Gallop! A black highland steed kicked up a trail of dust as it trotted forward with Daluan Ruozan. In front of it were piles of corpses, both Arab and Tibetan, and a bloody mist filled the air. Daluan Ruozan's expression was calm and indifferent. He seemed to have some invisible force field that caused everyone to focus on him. Gao Xianji creased his brow and suddenly stopped. "Yuanqing, Lu Shi, continue leading the army in pursuit. I'll remain to keep an eye on Daluan Ruozan." The demonic emperor Old Man and the Wushang village chief also slowed down, frowning as they looked at the distant Daluan Ruozan. But when they saw the look in Daluan Ruozan's eyes, the two seemed to understand something, and their creased brows relaxed. "Hiya!" Wang Chong's eyes flashed as Daluan Ruozan approached, and he urged his own horse forward to meet him. As Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozan approached each other, everything began to fall silent, countless gazes gathering on the pair. Even the most unaware person knew that Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozan were mortal foes. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had risen off the back of Daluan Ruozan's reputation, and in the distant Talas, the two had yet another destined encounter. Clip-clop. When they were separated by tensome paces, Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozan both came to a stop. The two of them silently stared at each other, and after what seemed like both a single second and like countless eons, everyone finally heard a long sigh. "The victor is king while the loser is scorned. Wang Chong, you have won this battle. For the next tensome years, no one in the entire continent will be able to contend against you or the Great Tang." The fierce winds constantly blew Daluan Ruozan's robes here and there, but the turmoil in his mind was far more intense. "You should have never even come to this battle," Wang Chong calmly said. To Daluan Ruozan, the final result of this battle might have appeared to be an accident, but in his own view it was an inevitability. Daluan Ruozan had no idea just how much effort and preparation Wang Chong had put into this battle. In truth, the battle had started from the moment he had erected a city in Wushang. Daluan Ruozan had been fighting a war he had been certain to lose. "Heh!" Daluan Ruozan chuckled, his expression indifferent. It was like he had seen through everything. "How could I not come? Whether it was for me or Yusang, it was imperative that I be at Talas. But the victor is king while the loser is scorned. I lost, so I have nothing to say." Wang Chong was silent. Just as Daluan Ruozan had said, the victor was king while the loser was scorned. This was a principle that all generals understood and abided by. Although Daluan Ruozan had truly made a lot of trouble for him, Wang Chong had to admit that Daluan Ruozhen was an opponent worthy of his respect. Wang Chong, I did all I could in this battle, and I feel no regrets in losing to you. Nothing to be sorry about. I've spent half my life on military matters and have always been proud of my intelligence. I rarely encountered anyone who could contend against me, and even though I wasn't physically strong, even Zhangzhou Jianxiong had to keep his distance around me, wasting 10-some years in the southwest unable to make any progress. Wang Chong, you are the first and only person that has pushed me to the end of the line. Daluan Ruozhen looked at Wang Chong with no hatred or resentment in his eyes, but pride and satisfaction. Putting aside their respective countries and standpoints, to be able to encounter a true foe in a lifetime could be considered a sort of blessing. At the very least, he felt no regrets on his part. Wang Chong, can you agree to a request of mine? Daluan Ruozhen suddenly said. Seeing Wang Chong slightly crease his brow, Daluan Ruozhen smiled and continued, Be at ease. I will no longer be your foe. Give Huashu Huaitsong's body to me, and I will remain here to do whatever you want with. Please. With this last word, Daluan Ruozhen's smile slowly faded away, and he slightly bent at the waist, a begging look in his eyes. In that moment, the peerless and far-sighted wise minister of Yusang was no more. In front of Wang Chong was an ordinary, humble, and insignificant Daluan Ruozhen. Bang! Gao Xianji, Chang Qianli, Li Sai, and Xue Qianjun all reeled in shock from this sight. Even Wang Chong was moved. Everyone had heard Daluan Ruozhen's words. None of them had imagined that Daluan Ruozhen would even give up his life for the sake of Huashu Huaitsong's corpse. And they had even less expected that he would lower his head to Wang Chong for the sake of Huashu Huaitsong's corpse. Daluan Ruozhen was proud and conceited, and few people in the world could easily make him lower his head. Not even Gao Xianji was capable of such a feat. But for the sake of Huashu Huaitsong's corpse, he had given up on all dignity and lowered his proud head. At that moment, Wang Chong's heart was overcome by an indescribable feeling. Can you allow it? Daluan Ruozhen asked once more, a hint of pleading in his voice. I have known Huashu Huaitsong for all my life, and he was my constant companion. I cannot do what I promised him, but at least I can send him back to Yusang and give him a proper burial. Is that okay? Wang Chong saw the dying embers in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes, and inexplicably, he thought back to Huashu Huaitsong's last words. His heart sighing deeply, he finally had his horse trot back a few steps. Even though he had fought with Daluan Ruozhen for so long, in the end, he found it impossible to refuse this last request. Someone, bring over Huashu Huaitsong's body. Gallop! A few moments later, several Tang cavalry rode over with a horse from the rear. Atop the horse was the body of Huashu Huaitsong. Lord Marquis. Several people stepped forward, placed Huashu Huaitsong's body in front of Daluan Ruozhen, and quickly took their leave. Wang Chong silently stared at Daluan Ruozhen, but Daluan Ruozhen seemed to see nothing and feel nothing. His eyes had been fixed on Huashu Huaitsong from the moment he had appeared. Daluan Ruozhen's faint smile had long ago vanished, and as he led his horse forward, that ever-unperturbed face gazed upon Huashu Huaitsong's corpse with deep sorrow and grief. Huashu Huaitsong was wearing a fiery suit of red armor, and even in death, his muscular body exuded an imposing and valiant aura. But his face was pale and his body was devoid of life. Daluan Ruozhen raised his head and asked, Wang Chong, can you tell me what his last words were? Wang Chong gave a deep sigh and relayed Huashu Huaitsong's final words in their entirety. As Daluan Ruozhen stared at Huashu Huaitsong's body, his entire body trembled and 2 trails of tears trickled down from his eyes. Huashu, I'm sorry. In this war, I failed to keep my promise. Daluan Ruozhen lowered his head, his entire body trembling as scenes from the past flitted past his eyes. On the Tibetan plateau, the young Huashu Huaitsong angrily stared at him like a tiger cub. I, Huashu Huaitsong, am a dragon and tiger of the plateau. Even if the Tsenpo has decreed it, I will never submit to a trifling scholar like you. Haha, what does it matter if you're a dragon or tiger? As a dragon, you can't ascend to the heavens, and as a tiger, you can't sink into the earth. The strength of a single man can't create any sort of peerless achievement, so what use is it? You! Haha! What are you yewing about? Are my words wrong? Humph! A scholar who doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken, who can't even beat one of my subordinates. What use are you? Hey! Do you know how to run a country and bring peace to its people? To plan out strategies in a tent that can decide victory throughout the world? To form alliances with those distant to attack nearby enemies? How does Milord plan to revitalize Yusang? Is there anything that cannot be done in a time limit of 30 years? Humph, Milord doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. I worry that you might just be daydreaming. Ha ha ha. But don't I have you? Huishu, we've lost again. The Great Tang is far stronger than we imagined. You want to give up? No, never. Yusang is still too weak. Give me 30 years, and I will definitely make Yusang the strongest existence. Since that's the case, if Great Minister is not giving up, then for the next 30 years, let me be your left and right arms. Scenes from the past flickered through his eyes as swiftly as lightning, and tears endlessly poured down from Dalawan Ruozen's eyes. Huishu, this time, it was me who caused all this. You accompanied me for half my life, so let me accompany you as well. The two of you listen well. Immediately send Huishu Huaitsong's body back to the plateau. If any mishap occurs, then go back with your heads in your hands. Yes. The two loyal guards at Dalawan Ruozen's sides seemed to sense something. They both lowered their heads, sorrow in their eyes. Wang Chong, to be able to exchange blows with you is the greatest pride of my life. Dalawan Ruozen took in a deep breath. A little vim restored in his eyes as he gazed at Wang Chong. Be at ease. You will never regret this exchange you made today. Dalawan Ruozen faintly smiled, once more becoming that energetic and confident wise minister. Imperial Minister, Senpo. Dalawan Ruozen does not have the face to see you. In these two campaigns, 400,000 Tibetan cavalry were slain. Dalawan Ruozen can only offer his life as atonement. Swish! Before Wang Chong could react, Dalawan Ruozen drew the sword from his waist and swept it across his neck. Blood gushed into the sky, but Dalawan Ruozen stood with his head held high, his calm eyes staring up into the depths of the heavens, far off into infinity. Finally, the light went out of his eyes and he slowly dropped from his horse. Bang! As that slender figure fell to the ground, it sent up a spray of dust. At that moment, the entire battlefield seemed to become much quieter. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Li Sai, Xue Qianjun, everyone stared at this scene with expressions of utter shock. A renowned minister of a generation, the most famous sage of the Ngari royal lineage, an existence that had impeded the tiger of the empire Zhangzhou Jianqiong for 10-some years, just like that, in this tragic fashion, he had died. Great minister! Far away, on the long and narrow stone bridge, Huoba Senji gave a heart-wrenching cry, his eyes nearly bulging out of their sockets in rage. Wang Chong, there will come a day when you pay a price for today. Yusang will never lose. One day, I will take revenge for the great minister and great general, Lord Marquis. Let me take some people and kill him, Li Sai suddenly proposed, stepping forward as he stared at the distant Huoba Senji with cold eyes. Yusang is now devoid of elites, and without Dalawan Ruozen or Huishu Huaitsong. If we suddenly attack now, we have an extremely high chance of wiping out Huoba Senji and the remaining Tibetan soldiers, wrapping up any loose ends. The Gonka king also took 2 steps forward, though he said nothing. It was clear that as long as Li Sai was permitted to go, the Gonka king would join him. The two of them working together were entirely capable of killing Huoba Senji. After numerous battles, Wang Chong's prestige in the army was as high as the noon sun, and after he had killed Kateba, his prestige had risen far above anyone else. Not even veteran generals like Gao Xianji or Chang Qianli could compare. For Huoba Senji to threaten Wang Chong in front of so many people was simply suicidal. Forget it. Let him go. Wang Chong calmly replied. This person doesn't have the martial prowess of Huishu Huaitsong or the intelligence of Dalawan Ruozen. He's just angry about the death of Dalawan Ruozan. He poses little threat to the great Tang. After saying this, Wang Chong lowered his head, gazing at the nearby body of Dalawan Ruozan. For some reason, he felt no joy or excitement over killing Huashu Huaitsong and resolving the powerful threat of Dalawan Ruozan, only a faint and indescribable sense of loss and sorrow. Pass on my order. Return the bodies of Huashu Huaitsong and Dalawan Ruozan to Yusang. As for the remaining soldiers of Yusang, as long as they do not harbor any intention to attack, let them go. No one is permitted to attack them, Wang Chong ordered with a sigh. Yes, your subordinate will go. Around Wang Chong, whether it was Li Sai, the Gonka King, or any other officer, they all lowered their heads and adopted obedient expressions. Wang Chong waved his hand. Several people dismounted, placed Dalawan Ruozan's body on a warhorse, and led it away. By the stone bridge, a group of grief-stricken Tibetan warriors received Dalawan Ruozan's and Huashu Huaitsong's bodies. Without another word, they rode away, quickly vanishing into the distance. Boom! Suddenly, the long stone bridge was snapped off at the other end, the entire structure falling into the abyss. Wang Chong watched all this from a distance, saying not a word. Let's go. Wang Chong took in another deep breath before leading the army away. The matter with Yusang had been settled, but the matter of Arabia was far from it. No one understood more than Wang Chong the enormity of the threat this massive empire on the western border posed to the Great Tang. If he did not strike while the iron was hot and completely defeat them, the Great Tang would have to face yet another army of hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers someday in the future. Hiya! The cracking of a whip sharply resounded through the air. The army quickly began to move out. After a little while, the forces led by Wang Chong caught up to Shi Yuanqing and Lu Shi's men. The situation was different from what Wang Chong had predicted. Though he had caught up to the leading forces, he did not see Abu Muslim and the others. What's going on? Where are Abu Muslim and the Arabs? Wang Chong said, his brow creased. Lord Marquis, there was a problem. While we were pursuing Abu Muslim, we were ambushed and hindered by Osman. Lu Shi said between pants for breath. Osman? Wang Chong's eyebrows rose in surprise. If he remembered correctly, he had injured Osman at the very beginning, causing him to use the Arab form of blood escape to flee. Amongst the Arab commanders, he had been the first to leave the battlefield. Wang Chong hadn't expected him to appear at a time like this. Lu Shi bowed and sternly said, because we've never made any forays into Arab territory before, and don't know if they might have more reinforcements lying in ambush on the road, Yuanqing and I talked and decided that it was best to wait for Milord to arrive so that our armies could be together. It is not demanded to achieve the best possible result, but to avoid making mistakes. The Great Tang's victory in this battle was already decided, and there was no need to toss the fruit of victories to the Arabs for the sake of a momentary and risky advance. That's fine. Although Abu Muslim and Ziyad are both greatly weakened, a centipede can die and still not topple. His intelligence and experience are not something the two of you can contend against. Waiting for Wang Chong and myself to arrive and then moving out produces the same result, Gao Xianji said. Wang Chong nodded in complete agreement with Gao Xianji's words. Rise. Abu Muslim won't be able to get very far, and he won't have much time to rest and recuperate. Not far ahead is Samarkand, their closest base in the entirety of the West. No matter what, we can't allow them the opportunity to catch their breath and recruit more soldiers, Wang Chong solemnly said. While we have courage, we must pursue the cornered enemy, not emulate the hegemon king one. Abu Muslim and Ziyad were only so weak right now because they had given all their energy to the now-deceased Qutayba. Thus, their only option was to flee. But if they were allowed to recover their energy, the battle would not be so easy. Let's go. Gao Xianji was much more straightforward than Wang Chong. With a single order, he led his soldiers in pursuit of the fleeing Abu Muslim. After they had traveled for several dozen li, Banahan rode up on his red steed. Milord, ahead of us is the Black Forest. Once we pass through the Black Forest, it will just be several hundred li to Samarkand. Almost no one in Wang Chong's circle had been to Arabia, and they had little understanding of the surrounding area, but Banahan was different. As the chief of the Ferganans of the western regions, in his youth, Banahan had gone to Samarkand several times. Although it had been some time since those visits and he no longer remembered the exact route, he still had a rough grasp of the direction. Cree! A shrill cry suddenly came from overhead. A massive rock eagle unfurled its wings and began to circle in the air, drawing out strange patterns with its movements. After repeating this several times, it made a massive arc in the air and flew back to the front. Xianxia drew back his gaze from the sky and rode up to Wang Chong. "My lord, there's news from ahead. A battle seems to have taken place in the Black Forest." The rock eagles trained by Xianxia's eagle team all had a special language, and different flight patterns would convey different meanings. The rock eagle just now had conveyed the message, "Battle ahead." But how could that be? Ahead of us will be Arab territory. Besides us, who else could be capable of fighting the Arabs? Shi Yuanqing was the first to speak, the shock visible in his eyes. The strength of Arabia was undisputed to the west of the Tsong Mountains, and almost no power could contend against it. They had long ago exterminated anything that could pose a threat to them, so how could anyone be hindering Abu Muslim at this time? Even Gao Xianji appeared pensive. "Ha! That's not certain." Wang Chong seemed to think of something, his eyes flashing as he spoke. "Have you forgotten about that Khorasani?" Wang Chong's words were like a lightning bolt to the rest. After an initial shock, all of them began to understand. Before the last battle, the Khorasani had sent a messenger indicating a willingness to ally with the Great Tang. Based on what those Khorasani had promised, as long as the Great Tang could emerge victorious in the battle over Talas against Abu Muslim and his vast army, they would send their strongest force of cavalry to work with the Tang to impede the Arab retreat. The Aswaran cataphracts. Everyone shared the same thought. "Let's go!" Gao Xianji urged his horse into a gallop, the 20,000-some Tang soldiers following behind him in a flood toward the Black Forest. When they reached the edge of the Black Forest, only a few moments later, 10-some heavily armored cavalry in neat formation rode toward them. These people had bodies, appearances, and armor similar to the Arabs, but also very different. "It's the Khorasani." Shi Yuanqing and Lu Shi rejoiced. When the Khorasani had last visited Talas, the pair had personally received them, so they could tell at a glance the large difference between the Khorasani and the Arabs. "Is it Great General Wang Chong before us?" Several hundred paces away, a hawk-eyed and high-nosed Khorasani spoke in rough Tang language. "I am him." Wang Chong's eyes flashed, and he soon waved his hand at the rear. "Someone, go to the rear and bring Yuan Shusong. Senior Yuan, over." One of Wang Chong's personal guards went to deliver the order. A few moments later, Yuan Shusong rode up on a glossy-maned white Turkic steed. Knowing that the circumstances were unique, Yuan Shusong exchanged only a few pleasantries with Wang Chong before stepping forward to converse with the Khorasani cavalry. Although he appeared weak and scholarly, when it came to languages, Yuan Shusong immediately became energetic and confident, seemingly an entirely different person. "Gallop!" A few moments later, Yuan Shusong returned. "My lord, the Khorasani says that they know of my lord's victory, and according to their promise with my lord, they ambushed the retreating Arab army in the Black Forest, killing the governor of Cairo, Osman. The leader of the Khorasani, Great General Bahram, has sent word desiring to meet with my lord and discuss how to deal with the Arabs." Yuan Shusong excitedly said. "What?" Everyone was ecstatic to hear this news. "Wonderful!" Only Wang Chong and Gao Xianji glanced at each other in slight surprise. Although the strength of the Arabs had been greatly reduced and their morale was at its nadir, they still had an army of tens of thousands, with some of them being elite soldiers possessing abnormal strength. This sort of army could not be defeated by just anybody. If the Khorasani could defeat them and even kill the heavily injured Osman, this was a strength that could leave a very deep impression. Wang Chong turned and said to Gao Xianji, "The enemy of an enemy is a friend. The Khorasani shouldn't have any hostility. Let's go over and take a look," Gao Xianji said after thinking for a few moments. "Our strength has been greatly reduced and we don't have many soldiers left. The Khorasani will be of great assistance in suppressing the Arabs. Moreover, They are more familiar with the Arabian Empire, and with them guiding us, we will be able to avoid many problems. For the Khorasani to appear at this time was truly surprising, but it was also excellent news. With the Tensum Khorasani leading the way, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji entered the Black Forest. After around 7 minutes, Wang Chong and the others arrived in the depths of the Black Forest and met the Khorasani army, which had already finished its battle. Along the only path through the Black Forest, amidst shattered stone and fallen idols, were the corpses of Arabs and their war horses in various positions, their blood freely flowing through and dyeing this renowned merchant route of the Silk Road red. An army of 8,000 to 9,000 soldiers was currently tidying up the scene. These soldiers were all wearing very similar suits of armor, extremely thick and smelling of fire and scorched blood. Anyone could sense their tempered and veteran aura. This aura was similar to that of the Wuxian cavalry or the Mamelukes, but even more steady and firm. This was an aura that only those ancient and powerful armies with extremely long heritages could possess. The Aswaran Cataphracts. This name once more floated to the surface of Wang Chong's mind. This was the army which the Mamelukes had originated from and imitated. The Aswaran Cataphracts were almost certainly one of the strongest armies to the west of the Tsong Mountains. This army had single-handedly forged the dazzling and powerful legacy of the Sasana dynasty, and even decades after the Sasana dynasty had been vanquished, this army was still able to rally the people, and not even time could wear away at its prestige. When he saw this army, Wang Chong finally understood why the Arabian Empire and the Mamelukes viewed these remaining soldiers of the Sasana dynasty with such great apprehension. These thoughts flitted through Wang Chong's mind, and he quickly focused his attention on that golden-armored figure riding upon a monstrous horse, his aura like an imposing mountain, the leader of the Khorasani. His expression was solemn and his eyes were shining as brightly as the sun in the sky. His horse was also extremely terrifying, its tangled muscles bursting with power, its size 3 times that of an ordinary horse, making it stand out on the road. Asadii, Kisadiyalikalu. Before Wang Chong could speak, the golden-armored Khorasani turned his head to Gao Xianji and Wang Chong, and quickly focused on Wang Chong. Yuan Shusong rode next to Wang Chong and whispered into his ear, "Milord, this person should be the Khorasani Great General Bahram." He asks which person is Great General Wang Chong. Just as expected, Wang Chong nodded. When he saw this Great General Bahram, he basically understood how Abu Muslim had been defeated and Osman killed by an army of some several thousand men. Purely in terms of strength, this Great General Bahram was on the same level as Abu Muslim. Even if he was weaker, it wasn't by much. And the feeling Wang Chong got from this Great General Bahram told him that this was a top-class commander who had been tempered through hundreds of battles, forged from a sea of blood and mountains of corpses. The Sasana dynasty had been eliminated by Arabia decades ago, and it wasn't possible for the younger generation of officers to possess this sort of aura. It was obvious that Great General Bahram had been one of the senior generals of the Sasana dynasty. In his greatly weakened state, Abu Muslim was naturally no match for him. "Senior Yuan, come with me." Wang Chong spoke briefly with Gao Xianji before riding forward. "Great General, my respects." Wang Chong stopped in front of Bahram and nodded in greeting. Yuan Shusong quickly translated Wang Chong's words. Clang! Before Wang Chong could do anything else, the Khorasani leader unsheathed his sword, flourishing it in the air before holding it out levelly before him. He slowly lowered his head, a solemn expression on his face. At this sight, Wang Chong and everyone behind him were stunned. "Milord, he hopes to exchange swords," Yuan Shusong explained. "This is a sort of ceremony in the Sassanid dynasty, exchanging one's most precious swords to express the utmost courtesy and respect for a guest. The Khorasani regard their personal swords very highly, even more than their own lives, and they rarely perform this kind of ceremony." When Yuan Shusong, who was now around 50 or 60, was around 17, he had traveled the world. At that time, even the Sassanid dynasty had yet to be destroyed by Arabia. In his travels through the world, Yuan Shusong had developed a deep understanding of many of the Sassanid dynasty's customs, and knew the unusual significance with which they regarded the ceremony. "So that's how it is." Wang Chong understood, and with a grunt, He unsheathed his Wuxia steel sword and offered it with both hands. In front of all the Tang and Khorassani soldiers, the two of them exchanged swords. Boom! At the moment of exchange, all the Aswaran cataphracts behind Bahram, as well as the other Sassanid cavalry, exploded with cheers. Deluya, Xianxia? Bahram spoke once more, an expression of deep respect on his face. Great General Bahram says that the Arabs are the eternal enemies of the Sassanids. For killing Ibak, the foe of the Sassanids, and killing Qutayba and more than 400,000 Arab soldiers, the Sassanids are eternally grateful to Milord. As long as Milord is willing to strike against the Arabs, the Sassanids are willing to follow Milord's command and be Milord's staunchest ally to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Yuan Shusong constantly interpreted. Great General is too polite. Wang Chong quickly replied. We have also heard of the Sassanids' situation. The Arabs are cruel and brutal, delighting in conquest and destruction. On this matter, we share a common enemy. And the Great Tang is also willing to be the Sassanids' staunchest ally in fighting against the Arabs. It is enough to hear these words from General Wang. Bahram's eyes brightened. As he spoke, he extended his large and vigorous right palm. Heh! Wang Chong chuckled and strongly gripped it with his own right hand. At that moment, no one could have expected that this simple yet forceful handshake had created the strongest alliance to the west of the Tsong Mountains, and it had also created the most powerful, loyal, and reliable ally the Great Tang could have between Khorasan and Samarkand. Ha ha ha! As Wang Chong and Bahram loosened their grips, the entire Black Forest resounded with the joyful laughter of both armies. With Bahram and his 9,000-some Aswaran cataphracts, Wang Chong's strength was bolstered. Now, Bahram had some important news to convey. The Khorassani had learned from the personal guards that Abu Muslim had left in Samarkand that Samarkand was already beginning to gather militia. The moment Abu Muslim arrived, it was prepared to close its gates and rely on its high and thick walls to deal with the Tang. General has never been to Samarkand, so perhaps you do not know that the height and thickness of Samarkand's walls are on nearly the same level as Tala's. If they are allowed to enter the city and gather many militia, it will be extremely unfavorable for us. The urgent task at hand is to not give them any time to rest, Bahram sternly said. In addition, we have men in Samarkand who have successfully infiltrated the army, even taking control over a city gate. But Abu Muslim has always been cautious. It is almost guaranteed that when he arrives at Samarkand, he will rearrange the defenses of the city. Thus, we have to move quickly. Speed is paramount in war. In addition, in this war with the Arabs, how long goes General plan to stay in the area? A hint of deep concern appeared in Bahram's eyes. To work with the Great Tang, the Sassanids had dispatched all their elites, even deploying the ever-hidden Aswaran cataphracts. These soldiers were more than enough to deal with the remnants of Abu Muslim's defeated army. But once Abu Muslim had time to catch his breath and gather more Arab soldiers, the Sassanids would sustain vicious losses. The Aswaran cataphracts had been able to survive the determined efforts of the Arabian Empire to exterminate them because they had always remained hidden, leaving behind not a single trace. But now that they had revealed themselves, hiding themselves again would not be so easy. Ha, Great General! There is no need for concern. This matter between the Great Tang and Arabia will not end with just a single battlefield, and my goal is not merely a single Samarkand. On the front against the Arabs, the Sassanid dynasty can regard the Great Tang as its greatest ally and backer. General has no need to worry about this. Wang Chong knew what Bahram and the Khorassani were worried about, and he loudly laughed as he dispelled their worries. The aggressiveness of the Arabs foreordained that they would be forever enemies of the Great Tang. If they were not given a painful lesson and their vitality greatly wounded, in the future, they would undoubtedly come back with another army. Just as the Stone of Destiny had said, a mountain could not hold two tigers and a pool could not be home to two dragons. It was very difficult for two similarly enormous empires to exist on the same continent at the same time. Just this fact alone meant that Wang Chong would not lightly withdraw his troops. Wonderful! Bahram was elated. He had taken his Aswaran cataphracts on such a risky venture precisely so he could hear this promise from Wang Chong. General, be at ease. From Samarkand to Khorasan we still know many rebels, all of them the descendants of the dynasties that ruled the countries vanquished by the Arabs. I can get in touch with them and have them organized to work with General and sweep away the Arabs. The Arabs are perverse and cruel, and they are everyone's foe. General killed the Arab war god Qutayba at Talas, so I am confident that everyone will be willing to regard General as their leader in the fight against the Arabs. Wang Chong and Gao Xianxia glanced at each other in shock. Although the Great Tang had emerged victorious in the battle against Arabia, it had suffered devastating losses of its own, an army of more than 100,000 whittled down to 20 to 30,000. Even with the assistance of the Aswaran cataphracts, their forces were still rather weak for a conquest of Arabia. For the Great Tang to obtain even more help was truly a pleasant surprise. Great General, this is fine as well. Let us go with Great General's plan. Wang Chong turned to Bahram and faintly smiled. The Tang soldiers by now were extremely exhausted, and this war with the Arabs was bound to be a long one. Wang Chong ordered his army to rest and recover for a while before joining with the Aswaran cataphracts and setting off. Speed was paramount in war, and so the joint army set off without further delay, passing through the Black Forest and onward to Samarkand. Around 2 hours later, towering city walls as imposing as mountains appeared before everyone's eyes. What high walls! Li Sai shaded his eyes with a hand as he stared in shock at the grandiose fortress before him. Talas was already an exceptionally large city, but this city was even larger and more grandiose. The steep and sturdy walls soared to the heavens, and at just a glance, one could tell that this city would be even harder to break than Talas. Around Li Sai, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, Xue Qianjun, and the others had the same expressions of shock. The sight of this major strategic city of Arabia had left a deep impression on them. Begin! Bahram, seated upon his monstrous horse, gazed at the city walls and swung down a signal flag. A moment later, boom! A massive city gate 30 to 40 meters tall began to slowly open, revealing a path into Samarkand. Everyone felt a great weight being lifted off their hearts when they saw the gate open. Kill! With a clang, Wang Chong pulled out Bahram's sword and aimed it to the heavens, reflecting their cold light. Rumble! The earth quaked and groaned as the nearly 30,000 soldiers of the combined army charged into Samarkand. Ziad, hear my order. Strengthen the city defenses and switch around all the garrisons at each post. I want the number of soldiers posted at each gate to be increased by 4 to 5 times. Samarkand's walls are tall and thick, and this will be our most important tool in resisting the Tang. As long as we occupy this city, not even a year will be enough for the Tang to break their way through. Within Samarkand, Abu Muslim paced back and forth inside a domed hall, his expression tense and his eyes brimming with worry. If one looked carefully, one would notice that his eyes were slightly bloodshot. In the Battle of Talas, the Arabs had encountered an unprecedented defeat. Ibak had been killed, the Mamelukes had been greatly wounded, and Osman had been slain by Bahram's ambush. Most importantly, even the governor of war, Qutayba, had died to the Tang, together with more than 400,000 Arab elites. Such a gruesome defeat was enough to make the skull of any Arab governor go numb. Even now, Abu Muslim had no idea how to explain this all to the infuriated caliph. Yes, this general will go. Ziad was also brimming with concern and unease. After the defeat at Talas, the remaining Arab soldiers had truly been fleeing like stray dogs. From Talas to Samarkand, the number of soldiers that had remained at Abu Muslim and Ziad's side didn't even reach 30,000. Fortunately, they had Samarkand. The thought of Samarkand's thick and sturdy walls immediately caused Ziad to calm down. At the very least, with the help of these walls, the two of them would have a rare opportunity to catch their breath. Reporting. Ziad had barely walked 2 steps, not even leaving the military hall, when a frantic voice rang out in his ears. Both of them nervously turned their heads and saw a panting Arab messenger, his face pale and stricken with unease. Reporting. The second gate of Samarkand was broken through. The Sassanids, leading more than 20,000 Tang, are in the middle of attacking the city. The moment the messenger entered the hall, he kneeled down, a deluge of sweat coming from his body. What? Abu Muslim and Ziad both trembled in shock, as if they had seen a ghost. How could that be? What about the lookouts? Why didn't we receive any word of such a large ruckus? Did not a single person see such a large army approach? Ziad's eyes went round in disbelief. An army of more than 10,000 was so large that all except the blind could spot it, and they hadn't even gotten word of an enemy army approaching. "Milord," the scouts sent word, but before they could approach the military hall, they were slain by the experts the Sassanids hid in the city. The Sassanid spies are currently starting fires, killing people and stirring rebellion, and Samarkand is in chaos. "Milord, we should quickly retreat," the messenger frantically said. The last few words from the messenger were like thunder in Abu Muslim's and Ziad's ears, and their faces paled. The words "Milord, we should quickly retreat," dealt an even greater shock to them than the news that Wang Chong had joined hands with the Sassanids in this assault. The army had been defeated, although Abu Muslim and Ziad had recovered their strength and could now fight a battle to the death. Their soldiers had no morale. Not even the recovered Abu Muslim and Ziad could do anything about that. The death of Qutayba in that battle of hundreds of thousands had dealt a blow like none other to the army. None of the soldiers even dared to fight with the Tang army. These thoughts quickly flitted through his mind, and then Abu Muslim raised his head to the dome of the hall and gave a deep sigh. This time it seemed like there was truly no chance for them to turn the tables. "Pass on my order. Have the entire army withdraw. Leave Samarkand for the Tang." Abu Muslim's voice was tinged with great reluctance, but this battle was already settled. Ziad stood next to him, his face a complex mixture of emotions, and the look in his eyes constantly shifting. "This general will go." Finally, Ziad strode out of the hall. A few moments later, amidst the waving of signal flags, all the Arab soldiers in the city withdrew from Samarkand as if they were clouds being blown away by the wind, and they set off for the even farther Khorasan. What? Abu Muslim and Ziad fled so quickly. Within Samarkand, Wang Chong couldn't help but sneer at the news. "I originally thought that there would be a major battle, but it seems like that's not necessary. Sukai, in my name write 2 letters. One is for Feng Chongqing back in Anxi. Have him send some soldiers to garrison Samarkand. The other letter is for the imperial court. The battle is over, and the imperial court will need to send someone to handle the aftermath. With Talas destroyed, the strongest bridgehead the Great Tang had in the war against Arabia was now Samarkand. Now that they occupied this fortress, even a small number of soldiers would be enough to oppose the Arabs. Lord Wang Chong, west of Samarkand, is flat land with few defenses. Abu Muslim won't be able to find any strong defensive positions there, so he will definitely flee all the way to Khorasan. This is the best chance for us to continue the assault, suppress Arabia, and widen our conquest." Bahram sternly said. Let's do as my lord says. The entire army will set out in pursuit." Wang Chong nodded. With the guidance of the Sassanids, Wang Chong's forces would progress as smoothly as a fish swam through water, encountering very little opposition. A few moments later, the war drums began to thunder. Leaving several thousand men behind to hold Samarkand together with the Khorasani, the 2 armies set off, tightly pursuing Abu Muslim. As they journeyed, the news of the victory at Talas and the death of Qutayba began to spread. Between Khorasan and Samarkand, the entire eastern zone of Arabia quaked as the people of the many kingdoms that Arabia had conquered began to cheer. With Bahram's prestige and coordination, the army was like a rolling snowball, more and more rebel soldiers joining its ranks. When they had first set out from Samarkand, Wang Chong's army together with the Sassanids totaled 30 to 40,000, but by now they had gathered a force of 100,000, and the number was continuing to rise at an astonishing rate. Ultimately, Wang Chong managed to gather the forces of 30 to 40 different factions at his side and commanded an army of more than 200,000, an intimidating and grandiose force. Abu Muslim was originally still capable of doing battle with Wang Chong, but now that he had more than 200,000 soldiers, Abu Muslim had completely lost this opportunity. In the past, the Arabs had ruled with an iron fist, slaughtering the people of its eastern region and levying heavy taxes upon them, causing resentment to build amongst the people. When the Arabs were strong, all was fine, as they were able to suppress any dissent. But now that a new challenger had appeared, particularly one that had inflicted upon Arabia a devastating defeat at Talas, this resentment and hatred flooded out and became Wang Chong's greatest assistance in his western campaign. As Wang Chong continued to pursue Abu Muslim's defeated army, elsewhere, the other empires and civilizations of the conflict quaked at the news of the Great Tang's victory, and the structure of the world silently began to change. Flap, flap. A carrier pigeon from the distant Samarkand flew into the headquarters of the Anshi Protectorate. Its news of the victory at Talas left all the factions of the western regions slack-jawed and wide-eyed. 100,000 versus 500,000. Such a large difference in numbers, and yet the Great Tang won. Unbelievable! In the palace of Further Beilu, a muscular man with a long beard suddenly jumped to his feet, his large bronze eyes brimming with extreme shock. The war between Arabia and the Great Tang had swept up the kingdoms of the western regions in a storm, and the numerous kingdoms swayed back and forth like grass growing on the top of a wall, struggling over whether they should submit to the Great Tang or Arabia. All these countries were trying to guess at who the final victor would be, and Further Beilu had clearly favored Arabia. After all, this was an army of 500,000 elites overseen by powerful individuals like Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Osman. Defeat was practically impossible. But reality had given the king of Further Beilu and all his ministers a vicious slap to the face. Pass on my order. Prepare 10,000 taels of gold, 10 bushels of jewels, 100 beauties, and 10,000 head of cattle. Have them delivered to the Anshi Protectorate as soon as possible to congratulate the Great Tang for its victory. The king of Further Beilu roared within his palace like a lion. Finding that the guard delivering the message was moving too slowly, he practically kicked him out of the hall. Unlike Further Beilu, both Greater and Lesser Balor were in a celebratory mood. Ha ha ha! I just knew that this was how it would turn out. As expected, the Great Tang emerged victorious. The kings of Greater and Lesser Balor had decided to meet upon learning the news so they could celebrate. For this battle, Greater and Lesser Balor had loaned out 8,000 of their best pikemen for an incredible sum. Although all these pikemen had died in battle, the Great Tang had won, allowing Greater and Lesser Balor to receive an enormous return on investment. With this victory, the Great Tang now owed Greater and Lesser Balor an immense favor. In the future, Greater and Lesser Balor could rely on the shade of the tree that was the Great Tang and would no longer have to worry about being bullied around by Yusang. As for the 8,000 pikemen who had died in battle, this was truly a painful loss, but Greater and Lesser Balor knew the method to train pikemen, so training more was just a matter of time. Greater and Lesser Balor were far from the only ones rejoicing over the news. Besides those kingdoms that had supported the Great Tang, there were also countless mercenary tribes that had participated in the battle. Haha, victory! The Great Tang won. The chief also won. This time, it's the Arabs that are being bullied around. Across the entire western regions, north to south, east to west, all the tribes that the Great Tang had hired for the Battle of Talas were cheering. Victory and defeat were both commonplace for soldiers, and almost all the mercenaries they had dispatched for this battle had been killed. But to the shepherds of the tribe who had remained in the rear, this wasn't important. They only cared about one thing. Did the heroic warriors of the tribe die for the winning side? Although they had lost many warriors, this meant that they would receive a great sum of money in compensation. This money, together with the support and guarantee of the Great Tang, would give these tribes an ideal opportunity to further develop and strengthen themselves. For the tribe, they were willing to sacrifice everything, and dying in battle was the best ending for a warrior. This was a principle that all the nomadic tribes upheld. Damn! Now this is a problem. While those tribes of the western regions that had participated in the Battle of Talas were celebrating, several dozen li from the headquarters of the Anshi Protectorate, a one-eyed tribal chief of the western regions tore off his eye patch and threw it to the ground. These Arabs are truly too useless. If I had known that they would lose to the Great Tang, I would have never offended the Great Tang for the sake of some petty profit. When Chishi Protector General Wang Chong was frenziedly recruiting soldiers in the western regions, not all the tribes had vigorously stepped forward. There was no lack of tribes like the Arjun tribe that had been bribed by the Arabs. They found various reasons to not take the mercenary contracts while secretly sowing chaos in the western regions. This would have been fine if the Great Tang had been defeated, and the Arjun tribe could have obtained an enormous sum of war assistance gold from the Arabs. But now, Arabia had been defeated, and the Arjun tribe had to think about how to deal with the fury and reckoning of the Great Tang. "Chief, what should we do? I hear that the new Tang commander is an extremely bad person to provoke," one of the core members of the Arjun tribe asked, his face ghastly pale and sweating profusely. Chishi Protector General Wang Chong hadn't been in the western regions for very long, but his name already thundered in everyone's ears. For the sake of the Gonka tribe, this Tang commander had exterminated the Saka, accusing them of going back on their word. And in the war between the Great Tang and Arabia, his army had killed 400,000 Arabs. Such cruelty and callousness made him seem like an Azura general. No one dared to imagine what would happen to the tribe once he returned to the capital and began to settle accounts. Suddenly, he clenched his teeth and added another order. In addition, prepare 100,000 head of livestock, 100 beauties of the western regions, and 10 of the maidens the Arabs sent. If Feng Chongqing doesn't agree, then our only option is to flee to the deserted and frigid lands of the extreme north. I have heard that there is an emerging group of savages living there. When the time comes, battle with them might be unavoidable. Yes. Similar events were taking place all across the western regions. The major victory at Talas had intimidated all the tribes. Unlike in the past, the Great Tang had finally proved itself as the supreme force on the continent by defeating the strongest empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains, the Arabian Empire. All the countries of the continent were filled with awe and respect toward the now supreme empire. At this moment, no one was more excited than Feng Chongqing, who had been left to hold the rear in Suaya. "Ha ha ha, victory! The Great Tang won. My lord, General Wang. I knew that you would return victorious." Feng Chongqing sat on the spacious throne in the upper reaches of the hall, holding the letter Wang Chong and Gao Xianji had sent from Samarkand, his entire body radiating delight. He could read that letter 100 times and not find it boring. Reporting. As the elated Feng Chongqing was reading through the letter again and again, a voice came from outside. Thump, thump, thump. A messenger of the Anshi Protectorate strode into the hall. "My lord, the Jasaka tribe of the western regions has sent a letter of congratulations for the victory at Talas. In addition, it has also sent 10,000 taels of gold, 10,000 head of livestock, 100 beauties, and various pearls and agates. In addition, the Naaman tribe has sent 1,000 taels of gold, 100,000 head of livestock. The Kiti tribe has sent 10,000 bushels of agates, countless pieces of green jade, as well 5,000 jade pendants carved from mutton fat jade. The Barda tribe has sent 20 of the highest quality pearls, 10,000 war horses, and 20,000 taels of gold to congratulate the Great Tang on its victory. The Kingdom of Jushur has sent 50,000 taels of gold, 20,000 rolls of silk, and 5,000 sets of green jade. The Kingdom of Western Jumi has sent 30,000 taels of gold, 100 beauties." The kneeling messenger continued to read out from the long list in front of him. Feng Chongqing grinned from the throne, so happy that his lips didn't have time to come together. Quite a few of these tribes were allies of the Great Tang, but the majority of those sending gold and beauties had been wavering over which side to pick in the war, some of them even leaning more toward the Arabs. But Feng Chongqing didn't care. The battle was over, and what he needed to do was find the way which would maximize the benefit to the Great Tang. 10,000 taels of gold, 10,000 head of livestock, and 100 beauties? With just this little, you want to avoid a disaster and hope to see your crimes forgiven? How could that be? If I don't squeeze a little more blood out of you, none of you will remember this lesson. Feng Chongqing squinted as he lightly tapped the fingers of his right hand on the throne's golden armrest. A second later, his mind had settled on a plan. Pass on my order. Enlist more soldiers and gather more mercenaries. 10 days later, they are to accompany me to Samarkand. This time, I'd like to see which kingdom or tribe will dare to refuse, Feng Chongqing sternly said. In addition, help me send a letter to Lady Su Qichin. If we want to smoothly advance westward and occupy Samarkand and other Arab territories, her assistance will be required. Yes. Just a few days later, Wang Chong's second carrier pigeon, flying along the Silk Road, entered the capital. Boom! Like a boulder crashing into a lake, the news of victory at Tala's arriving in court set off an explosion of cheers. Even though the civil officials had many quarrels with the military officials, now that the Great Tang had emerged victorious over those foreigners to the west of the Tsong Mountains, all of them celebrated together. Ha ha ha, victory! As expected, another victory. This king knew that you wouldn't let him down. As long as you're here, the Great Tang will have nothing to worry about on its borders. King Song was full of energy upon hearing the news, his head held high. On this campaign, he had endured immense pressure in his support for reinforcing Talas, but now the storm had passed. Most importantly, with this unprecedented victory, Wang Chong had scored full points, once more confirming King Song's keen insight. Bastard! All those great generals couldn't kill him. Is this kid a monster? King Qi had learned the news as well, and barely after walking out of the imperial palace, he could no longer restrain his rage and pulverized his carriage with a single punch. King Qi wasn't actually very interested in military affairs. All he cared about was authority and power, but as long as the Wang clan, King Song, and that brat continued to exist, he would find it excruciatingly difficult to achieve his goals. King Qi had attempted multiple times to bring down the Wang clan and King Song, but that 17-year-old brat had ruined his plans every time. Wang Chong was still young, but he was already a thorn in King Qi's side. The War of the Southwest had already allowed Wang Chong to obtain the Sage Emperor's favor and a noble title, becoming the first young Marquis of the Central Plains, and later, the youngest Protector General in history. With this additional victory under his belt, even being made a king was not out of the question. King Qi felt threatened like never before. In the southeastern section of the Imperial Palace, a carriage was parked outside the renowned Four Quarters Embassy. The door to the carriage was open, and Wang Chong's big uncle Wang Zhen tidied his robes before walking out of the carriage. Wang Zhen was in high spirits, his eyes bright and his face a rosy red, as if he had drunk an entire pot of wine, and his joy was evident from the look in his eyes. His nephew had been fighting abroad, commanding 100,000 against 500,000 and dealing a major blow to the trilateral alliance of Arabia, Yusang, and the Western Turks. The entire Wang clan was being praised and respected by the people for this feat, and Wang Zhen, as the big uncle, was also being honored. Let's go. Take me to see the old master. I want to personally tell him the news, Wang Zhen loudly proclaimed. Passing through the main gate and a bamboo forest, he made his way toward the great hall of the Western Embassy. Before Wang Zhen had even gone in, he could hear loud laughter from within, and the old master's laughter was the most prominent of all. Zhener, you came at the perfect time. That child Chonger won a major victory at Talas. Truly, he did not let down the Great Tang and His Majesty. Come, let's share a cup. An elderly and steady voice came from the hall. Duke Zhou, dressed in leisure clothes, was seated on the highest seat, and when Wang Zhen walked over the threshold, Duke Zhou immediately waved at him. Zhener, your father is in a rare mood. Accompany him today in sharing a few drinks. The silver-haired wife urged on from the side, a genial look on her face. Duke Zhou had never been in good health, so his wife usually forbade him from drinking alcohol, but she had changed her attitude today. Not only did she permit him to drink, she even requested her eldest son to be his drinking partner. Wang Zhen had been mystified at first, not understanding how the old master had so quickly learned the news, but when he saw that person sitting next to his father turn his head toward him, Wang Zhen instantly understood. Elder Yi, Wang Zhen blurted out. No wonder. With Elder Yi here, it was no wonder how the old master had learned the news. This child will comply. Wang Zhen faintly smiled, raising his robe as he sat down at the table, which was laid out with an assortment of side dishes. Taking a small cup from the table, he clinked cups with the two elders. For Chonger, for the Great Tang. Bang! At the same time, at the most ancient and most revered Su residence, the tightly shut rear gate suddenly flew open with a bang. A child of 8 or 9 years old charged in, waving around a letter as he shouted. Ha ha ha! Master! Victory at Talas! Senior brother won! He won! Little Xianxia was so excited that his face was red, and he hadn't even noticed that he had lost a shoe while running. His eyes were flashing as he rushed toward that simple and somewhat shabby old house in the center of the Sioux residence. Stop! While he was still 10-some steps from the house, an elderly and dignified voice sternly called out like a peal of thunder. Little Xianxia's body shivered as he came to a sudden halt. Didn't I tell you? As a general, one must be unperturbed even if Mount Tai falls, composed even when attacked by sabers or axes. This was just a minor border conflict, but look at you now, the elderly voice sternly reprimanded. But this was no ordinary battle. Senior brother's battle was 100,000 versus 500,000. This was a major victory while being outnumbered. Little Xianxia angrily retorted, his face utterly unconvinced. He lowered his head, pouting, and clutched his fingers together while his eyes stared at his feet. You still dare to talk back? Xianxia angrily rebuked. That's how it's always been. Little Xianxia huffed, but his voice was almost inaudible. At this moment, another elderly voice came from out of the house. It was different from Xianxia's, less powerful and dignified. Little Xianxia, enough. Don't talk back to your master. Your master knew of the matter regarding your senior brother some time ago. You should take your leave now. I understand, Uncle Fong. Little Xianxia stuck out his tongue and made a face before running off. Little Xianxia had no idea that two elderly pairs of eyes within the house closely watched him leave, only looking away after a long while. Xianxia was seated in an armchair, his eyes glancing at the old servant next to him as he sternly said, Fong Hong, you spoil him too much. It was just a battle, and yet he wasn't able to keep his composure at all. How can he command an army like this, plan out strategies, and subjugate the four directions? The art of war was one of planning and strategy. On the line were the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers and the people of one's country, making it a matter of utmost importance to the state. Thus, Xianxia had always been strict and harsh when managing his army, and he treated little Xianxia in the same way. Haha, old master. There's no need to be so harsh on him. After all, he's just a child of 8 or 9. And besides, doesn't old master have that child Wang Chong to inherit your legacy? The old servant Fong Hong said with a smile. You? Surprisingly, Xianxia was momentarily speechless. The old servant silently smiled. After serving his master for more than half his life, he keenly understood his master's thoughts and plans. Xianxia had never admitted it, but deep down in his heart, he was already treating Wang Chong as the disciple that would inherit his legacy. Otherwise, why would he teach him the art of god and demon obliteration, and then also train 4,000 Azure martial army soldiers for him? It was just that Xianxia would never admit that out loud. You'll spoil this child rotten eventually. I really can't deal with you too. Xianxia glared at his nearly 60-year-old servant, and then turned his eyes on the wine cup on the table, downing it in a single gulp. The old servant remained silent, but the smile on his face deepened. He took up the white porcelain wine jar and silently filled Xianxia's cup once more. His master normally didn't drink more than 4 cups of wine, but this was the 8th time today he had filled his cup, something Xianxia had failed to realize. Although Xianxia claimed that this was just an ordinary battle, Fong Hong could clearly tell that no one was more elated than his master over the news. Seeing that the wine jar was about to be emptied, the old servant silently exchanged it for a new one and continued to fill Xianxia's cup. Though he had served his master for many years, Fong Hong had rarely seen him so happy, particularly after meeting that child he called Chong-er. His master had been smiling more and more frequently, which was a great source of comfort for Fong Hong. As the news of the victory at Talas continued to spread, its effects on the capital widened. Slap! Slap! As the imperial announcements were posted on the city gates of the capital, revealing even more details, the entire capital began to buzz with chatter. Ha ha ha! What did I say? The young Marquis is the reincarnation of the heavenly mandate 1 star. come to assist His Majesty in sweeping over the barbarians and continuing the Great Tang's golden age. To contend against 500,000 with 100,000, this young marquis is truly the war god of the new generation. Only the Crown Prince's junior guardian Wang Zhongxi and the war god from the generation before that, Su Zhengchun, can compare to such accomplishments on the battlefield. Ha ha ha, he truly is a descendant of Duke Zhou. The Wang clan has 3 generals, a truly loyal and devoted clan. We should request the Sage Emperor and the Imperial Court to grant the Wang clan a noble title. That's right. Let's go together to request the Sage Emperor to give the Wang clan a noble title. Crowds had thronged at the various city gates, gathering together the peddlers, merchants, tycoons, and even the nobles of the capital. Not only that, the tea houses, wine houses, and inns of the capital, or anywhere else where people were gathered, were buzzing with conversation on the gruesome battle that had taken place at Talas. As everyone loudly chatted, their faces shone with pride. The talk about granting a noble title to the Wang clan had originally been only discussed by the common people, but later on, even officials of the court became deeply convinced and began to submit memorials, eventually creating a loud voice that could not be ignored. And all these memorials eventually gathered in the depths of the imperial palace in the Sage Emperor's hands. Halls loomed within the imperial palace, and in the very depths of the imperial palace was a golden hall, majestic and solemn. Like a giant bird with unfurled wings, it towered over the imperial palace, looking down upon the entire capital. The Taiji Palace, the residence of the Great Tang's Sage Emperor. No matter how furious the storms of the outside world, this place would be eternally calm. Your Majesty, there was a major victory at Talas. The child Wang Chong was not unworthy of your Majesty's great favor. They have already passed through the Black Forest, occupied Samarkand, and are continuing onward toward Khorasan, the terminus of the Silk Road. A great deal of foreign territory to the west of the Tsong Mountains is now becoming a part of the territory of our Great Tang, and the lands under your Majesty's command have greatly increased. This is an unprecedentedly grand occasion. At this time, the voices wishing for the Wang clan to receive a noble title are getting louder and louder. This old slave has already received several hundred letters. Outside the palace, Eunuch Gao stood like the Maitreya Buddha, his hands enclosed in his sleeves as he smiled. Your Majesty, the granting of an additional noble title is no small matter. Starting from His Majesty Gaozong's era, it has been many decades since the imperial court last granted any great clan a noble title. And the granting of a noble title is tantamount to an iron ticket of pardon, and it might cause unrest and calls for a new government. The imperial court rarely gave a title or commendation to any particular great clan, and this was not simply out of caution. From past dynasties, one could see that all the great clans that had received noble titles would eventually become overly favored and proud, a future problem for the ruling dynasty. Even if the problem was not immediately obvious, their descendants would eventually prove this to be the case. The common people had no idea of this, but the imperial household had inherited the records from the past dynasties and was well aware. Moreover, the fact that the previous dynasties had rarely granted titles made the granting of a title even more significant. In the minds of the ministers, such an act was a show of exceptional favor from the emperor, and it would only take a little while for the people gathered around the ennobled clan to create a powerful faction. This would intensify the factional strife in the imperial court and shatter the balance of power. This was why the imperial court was so cautious about granting a noble title to a great clan. This did not mean it was impossible. A great clan that the imperial household could wholeheartedly trust could receive this unique honor. The palace was silent, as if it resided in another dimension. No one knew what the Sage Emperor was thinking at this moment. Your Majesty, why not have this old slave reject the idea? Gao Lishir finally said after a few moments of silence. Although the common people were currently expressing their full approval for this idea, and many of the officials of the court had voiced their agreement, having the imperial court refuse wasn't too difficult a task, and there were thousands of reasons that could be used. This had always been the nature of politics. There's no need. After a few moments, that dignified voice spoke from that palace which wielded the greatest authority in the world. Pass on our decree. The memorial is granted. Gao Lisher's body shuddered, and he suddenly raised his head, his eyes brimming with disbelief. This was the first ennobled clan in the Sage Emperor's generation. Not even old Master Yao had ever received such favor from the Sage Emperor, nor had the highly influential Yao clan been graced with such an honor. The ennoblement of the Wang clan would probably unleash shockwaves that would resonate through the imperial court for a long time, perhaps even affect the future structure of the Great Tang. Yes, this old slave will carry out the decree. Gao Lisher lowered his head and quickly took his leave. Rumble. The Sage Emperor had decreed that the 6 bureaus should work to ennoble the Wang clan, and this decree instantly sent great waves through the Great Tang. Such favor! What level of favor is this? Yes, the people are abuzz, and those who wish for the Wang clan to be ennobled are particularly elated. But the reaction in the court is entirely different. I didn't think that the Sage Emperor would so highly regard Wang Chong and the Wang clan. An old imperial censor was in shock at the news, his eyes going round with disbelief. Deep within the imperial palace, the Yuzhen Palace. Ha ha ha, little sister, you see? See how your adopted brother has done. How great of an honor is this, to be acknowledged as a fiercely loyal clan. You and I might not have any roots in the palace, but as long as we have the support of my sworn brother and the Wang clan, our position in society will be as firm as rock. We might even be able to sit on the same level as King Song and King Qi, becoming the third major faction. Yang Zhao, dressed in his white Confucian robes and wearing a black hat, strode into the palace with a scholar's bearing. But even though he did his best to mimic the manners of a scholar, he was still rather lacking. After taking only a few paces, he returned to his original demeanor. His head held high, he bounded happily into the hall toward Consort Taizhen. Big brother, you've truly done something of great advantage to us this time. The jade curtains rippled as a foot that seemed to be carved of white jade extended outward. Consort Taizhen, supported by a gorgeous maid, rose and slowly walked out. Consort Taizhen was also joyous at this moment. Her brother was lazy and an unrepentant gambler, and in the several months after coming to the capital, he had gambled away all his traveling expenses. He had spent day after day in the gambling dens, even begging on the streets for money. A truly disappointing brother. But he had his good points along with his shortcomings. After spending so much time in the capital, he had at least managed to accomplish one good thing. Just as he had said, Wang Chong had gifted her 2 poems. So Consort Taizhen had let King Song go, and Yang Zhao was able to become sworn brothers with Wang Chong. The 2 parties were so closely related that outsiders had long ago begun to regard them as being of the same faction. With the support of Wang Chong and the Wang clan, she would no longer be bereft of any backers in the court or palace. Come, take me to see His Majesty. I wish to personally leave the palace to visit the Wang clan and see this Madame Zhao. While the entire Great Tang was celebrating, immersed in the joy of victory, far away, in the northeast corner of Yusang, a lonely horse bell rang out through the air. Several thousand defeated soldiers, their armor cast away and their moods downcast, were currently traversing this winding and rugged path toward Yusang. In the center of this army was a banner depicting a white yak. These soldiers were none other than the remnants of the army that Huabasenji had led in retreat from Talas. In retreating from the stone bridge, Huabasenji and his men had taken more than double the time that they had needed to reach it when the Tibetans had come the first time around. The Battle of Talas was over and the news had been spread to all the kingdoms of the western regions. At this time, all the countries, big and small, along the route had shut their gates to these soldiers, displaying a clear hostility. If the army had just set out and were still at its full strength, Huabasenji would have long ago led his troops in taking these cities and destroying these kingdoms for daring to treat Yusang in this way. But with the great generals and the wise minister dead, and the remaining several thousand men on their last gasps of breath, they represented no threat to these kingdoms. There were many times when Huabasenji had been forced to lead his army on a long detour to avoid any conflicts with these factions. Such an act was an unprecedented humiliation. But Huabasenji no longer cared about such things. Great minister, generals, soon, you will be able to return to Yusang. The Tibetan plateau was close at hand. Huaba Senji turned his head to see the bodies of Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Huaitsong, and Dusong Mangpoj being carried on the backs of horses, and his expression became extremely downcast. When they had set off, they had been happily smiling, and their bold declarations were still ringing in his ears. It seemed like only yesterday that their grandiose army was 100,000 strong, vast and unstoppable. But in the blink of an eye, all this had gone up in smoke, and now he was alone, a defeated general with just several thousand soldiers at his command. When he thought of this, Huaba Senji couldn't help but reveal an expression of extreme sorrow. But he quickly composed himself. None of this mattered anymore. His only thought was to bring the bodies of the great minister and the others back to the plateau. "General, look ahead of us." While he had been losing himself in sorrow, a Tibetan soldier cried out in alarm and pointed ahead. Huaba Senji raised his head in shock, but he quickly saw that an army was encamped on the distant Tibetan plateau, appearing from this distance like so many ants. "It's the Western Turks." Huaba Senji's eyes widened as if he had been stabbed, and his mind seemed to be much clearer now. At this time, the army resting on the plateau also noticed these newcomers. Beneath the banner of a golden wolf on a blue backing, a muscular figure on his war horse took several paces forward and then stopped. "My lord, it's the Tibetans. They've also retreated." Chechen Benba rode out from the rear and gazed down at Huaba Senji. Wuxia was pale and his aura was extremely weak. His gaze passed through space to meet with Huaba Senji's. In that moment, Huaba Senji's eyes were brimming with rage while Wuxia's showed a hint of embarrassment. At the most crucial moment of the Battle of Talas, Wuxia had taken a blow from Wang Chong's palm and been immediately scared out of his wits, throwing his allies aside and withdrawing. For the Celestial Wolf Great General to do such a thing was extremely shameful. Now that he had encountered Huaba Senji and the Tibetans once more, how could Wuxia not feel embarrassed? But a moment later, Wuxia turned his gaze to Huaba Senji's side, where he saw the bodies of Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Huaitsong, and Dusong Mangpoj. His expression became complicated, a hint of sorrow in his eyes. Although his time as an ally of Yusang had been short, and there were many times when they had schemed against each other, the fox would mourn for the hare, having lost an ally against the hunter. Wang Chong and the Tang had killed Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Huaitsong, and Dusong Mangpoj, and Wuxia and his Western Turks had fared little better. Wuxia could not help but be emotionally moved at this time. "Great General, should we meet with them before we go?" Chechen Benba asked. "There's no need." Wuxia shook his head and quickly regained his composure. "The Battle of Talas is over, so the alliance between us and the Tibetans no longer exists. Starting from now, we will have to fight our own battles, confront an even more powerful Great Tang that might come for vengeance at any time. There is no need for our two sides to meet each other." Similar words were being spoken down below amongst the remnants of the Tibetan army. Wuxia turned his horse around and led his remaining soldiers away. Huaba Senji also mobilized his army. Although he was also headed for the plateau, he was headed in a different direction. The armies acted if they didn't know each other, forgetting each other amongst the rivers and lakes. Meanwhile, a vast distance from the capital of the Great Tang, the north winds swept over Karasan. The grass growing around this western terminus of the Silk Road was withered and covered in frost, and the temperature was chilly. Arrayed on the withered fields of grass outside Karasan was an army of tens of thousands, a vast sea of soldiers. The massive banner of a five-clawed dragon snapped in the wind, and around the dragon banner of the Great Tang were countless other war banners, reaching into the sky. 20,000 some Tang soldiers had combined with 180,000 rebels to form a grandiose army of 200,000, all of them somberly standing before the gates of Karasan. Great General Baram rode up on his monstrous horse and whispered into Wang Chong's ear, "General, it's about time. Everything is ready." Wang Chong nodded. He then turned to the vast and steely walls of Karasan. The black banners of Arabia could be seen all across the high walls, and the walls were manned by countless Arab soldiers. In the center of the army stood Abu Muslim and Ziyad. The two exuded storms of energy that soared into the skies as they maintained a distant standoff with the coalition army of 200,000 men. Abu Muslim, Ziad, have you finished thinking? Wang Chong's voice resounded over the army. Even though Wang Chong had been pursuing Abu Muslim from Samarkand to Khorasan day and night, hoping to not give Abu Muslim any time to catch his breath, he had still made a misstep. Abu Muslim had fled to Khorasan and had had 7 or 8 days to recover his strength. And through his authority as the governor of Iron and Blood, the ruler of Arabia's eastern war zone, he had managed to gather no small number of militia. Now, with the backing of the thick walls of Khorasan, he stood in a stalemate with the Great Tang. But no matter how tenaciously Abu Muslim resisted, it was already too late. The coalition army, with the Tang elite soldiers at its core and the 180,000 rebels as the main force, could not be stopped, no matter how reluctant Abu Muslim was to accept this fact. The momentum was on Wang Chong's side, and no one in Arabia's eastern region could contend against him. Wang Chong, any further talk is meaningless. Arabia does not have any surrendering generals, nor does it have soldiers that would surrender without a fight. Send out your soldiers. Abu Muslim stood on the walls like an imposing mountain, his expression hard and firm. Ziad also spoke from the high walls. Wang Chong, don't get any silly ideas. We've changed up all the men at every gate of Khorasan. Samarkand will not repeat itself. What does it matter if you have 200,000 men? Khorasan is an impregnable fortress that will never be taken. Khorasan had been the capital of the Sassanid dynasty, and back then, an army of hundreds of thousands of Arabs had tried for several years but had failed to break the Sassanid capital, all because of its sturdy defenses. In the end, 3 governors and the behemoth army had been needed to finally break the walls and end the Sassanid dynasty. But after the war, all the walls had been repaired, and the Arabs had even strengthened the walls. Although Wang Chong had 200,000 soldiers, this was far from enough to break the defenses of the city. Back in Talas, Abu Muslim had an army of more than 400,000, but after 2 months, he had still failed to take Talas, which was being held by only the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army. And Wang Chong had far fewer soldiers than Abu Muslim had had. Ha! It seems like you're ready to fight to the death. Wang Chong faintly smiled, utterly unsurprised by the attitudes of Abu Muslim and Ziad. Since that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. Abu Muslim and Ziad widened their eyes at Wang Chong's words. Khorasan's walls were extremely smooth and tough, and the two didn't believe that Wang Chong's forces could overcome them. Yet his confidence made them extremely uneasy. Wang Chong, what do you mean? Ziad couldn't help but bellow. Heh! Wang Chong chuckled as he ignored Ziad. He had not brought an army to this place so that he could exchange pleasant conversation with Abu Muslim and Ziad. Wang Chong turned to Bahram and said, Great General Bahram, we can begin now. Understood. Bahram somberly nodded, and then he gestured at a soldier behind him. The order was swiftly delivered.